two words used to label people in politics in the current us-them war are liberal and conservative. This is William Savanas again. We are working on the series about words, our language that divides us. Liberal and conservative. Liberal, fascinating word. So let's look at the dictionary meaning first. Liberal as an adjective is willing to respect and accept behavior or opinions different than one's own, open to new ideas. Meaning number two, relating to or denoting a political and social philosophy that promotes individual rights, civil liberties, democracy, and free enterprise. For that second definition, the opposite terms are narrow-minded and bigoted. Now, liberal as a noun, a supporter of policies that are socially progressive and promote social welfare. Definition two, a supporter of a political and social philosophy that promotes individual rights, civil liberties, democracy, and free enterprise. There are several terms listed that as similar: tolerant, open-minded, free, nonpartisan, unprejudiced, enlightened, easygoing, unbigoted, forbearing, unbiased, broad-minded, permissive, and impartial. That's a lovely list for anyone to apply to themselves consciously or unconsciously. Problem is, it's too bad that in practice, we never really live up to those synonyms and too often approve of others who don't either. Frankly, I've never met a political party that fits that dictionary description of liberal and its synonyms. There is a party that claims to. There are more than one parties that claim to. Yes. But parties that practice it towards people who disagree with them? No. And thus we have come up with that term, illiberal, liberal. Totally an oxymoron. The opposite terms for that second definition are narrow-minded and bigoted. So, like it or not, when the term liberal is used as a political label, all these other related terms get implied to the human mind. They create a rosier picture than what the political label liberal stands for. They impart an assumed system of personal values that almost no human being practices, and frankly, I doubt could consistently practice. In the process of importing other words, simply has to do with how the brain forms labels and how its automatic functions operate. A study of the effect of the brain on autopilot, it needs to be a part of all the political study and reflection that we do. Because equally devastating politically is the application of the labels narrow-minded and bigoted to all people who fall under a different political label like conservative. Again, happening pretty much by the brain on autopilot, not necessarily consciously. So no wonder we dehumanize our political others. The brain on autopilot imports those labels, narrow-minded and bigoted, and then builds out our political thoughts and judgments on the persons with the label liberal. Again, a study of the effect of the brain on autopilot needs to be part of all political study and reflection. Our brains on autopilot keep America's us, them, fight, flight systems in power. It doesn't have to stay that way. But let's get back to defining the political label, liberal. Liberalism is a political and moral philosophy based on liberty, consent of the governed, and equality before the law. That's a definition coming from Wikipedia. Of course, that same statement applies to conservatism, so we're going to have to look deeper at how political liberals define themselves. But a caution, liberal does not mean Democrat, and being a Democrat does not mean being a liberal. So count that out as a definition. In fact, the current political turmoil happening in the Democratic Party demonstrates that their party includes conservatives, moderates, and liberals. And among the liberal faction, there is a great deal of internal division as well about what they stand for. So our response here is to establish an understanding of liberal that would help us cross the language divide and lay a foundation of understanding for cooperation, dialogue, respect, and problem solving. And for that foundation, we're going to go to classical liberalism versus the morphed ideas held in practice today. Why? Because in the last 50 years, the ideas of what a liberal stands for and supports have radically changed at least every decade, and often much sooner. They've become a moving target. And while that may be fine when creating and influencing personal beliefs, that does not provide a basis for cooperation, dialogue, respect, and problem solving. That does not provide a basis for talking together in a conversation and for understanding persons talking from a liberal perspective. The following core classical liberal principles and ideas come from a group called the Institute for Humane Studies. I personally believe that they are probably the best, the representative core values that I've seen for the word liberal, specifically for the label political liberal. I hope you see by the time we've finished all 12 of them that they actually line up with the teaching that we presented early on the 6 innate moral foundations that are given a priority by liberals. And those 3 priority foundations are care, fairness, with the sense of proportionality involved, and liberty. Okay, so now on to the 12 core classical liberal principles and ideas. And I will be primarily reading these. First, human dignity. Human dignity is the foundational principle that all people possess dignity simply by virtue of the fact that they are human beings. All people possess dignity simply by virtue of the fact that they are human beings. 2, individual freedom. Individual freedom is the foundational principle in the classic liberal tradition. Classical liberals see individuals not as mere means to an end, but as ends in themselves, and thus deserving respect and the freedom to exercise agency, to adhere to their own beliefs, and to pursue their own goals. So, under individual freedom, political coercion that puts the collective ahead of the individual is a violation of that freedom. Respect for individual rights is essential for just and flourishing society. Number 3, voluntary action. Voluntary action is voluntary action is preferred over mandated or corrected action. The classical liberal social idea is a society of mutual benefit based on peaceful cooperation and mutual consent. Classical liberals favor constitutional constraints on government power. There is a broad agreement within the classical liberal tradition that the good society is the one that allows voluntary, consensual interaction in most aspects of life. Moving on to 4, followed by 5. Justice. Justice requires the individual rights of all people to be respected. Let me repeat that one. Justice requires the individual rights of all people to be respected, including rights of autonomy and self-determination over one's own body and the right to hold property. A just society is one that is based on voluntary consent, not coercion. Coercion. Oh, wow. Tonight. Number 5 is tolerance or toleration and pluralism. Now, toleration is the principle that as long as someone is not substantially harming others, their behavior, speech, and views should be legally permitted. A culture of toleration allows divergent ideas, customs, beliefs, and lifestyles to flourish in a society. Toleration or tolerance, therefore, then leads to pluralism. The principle of pluralism holds that not only can people from different backgrounds, faiths, and opinions live peacefully side by side, but they also should, because individuals and society benefit greatly from diversity. Number 6 is freedom of expression. Freedom of expression, which affords every person the right to voice his own or her own opinion, ensures that no good idea goes unheard and that no bad idea goes unchallenged. Freedom of speech is a core political value in that it ensures the right of the governed to criticize the government, and therefore serves as an essential check on state power. Open discourse is essential to learning and to seeking truth. It's crucial for people to have conversations with those they disagree with in order for each to discover where his or her priorities are wrong or incomplete. Classical liberals also recognize that there are certain cultural norms of conversation and debate, such as the presumption of good faith, respect for reason and evidence, and intellectual humility. These are essential companions to freedom of expression if conversation is to lead to learning and discovery. So now, number 7, which is the rule of law. The rule of law is the principle that society must be governed by rules that apply impartially and equally to all people. The rule of law is the principle that society must be governed by rules that apply impartially and equally to all people. Equality before the law. The rule of law also serves as a constraint on state power. In contrast to the rule of men, in particular, people who hold state power determine when and where specific rules apply. Now, in case that wasn't clear, they're contrasting here. The rule of law serves as a constraint on state power. That contrasts with the rule of men, in which a particular person or people holds state power and then determines when and where specific rules apply and whether or to what extent they are to be enforced. The rule of law is aimed at ensuring that all people are accountable and subject to the same rules and sanctions. If you're like me, you have plenty of thoughts going through your mind as we read these, often related to things happening in our political war that's happening, that is in progress and has been now for so many years. But that's fine. I just it illustrates how much we need to understand the basis of our differences. So, number 8, civil society. Classical liberals recognize that the institutions that constitute civil society, such as families, religious communities, neighborhood, professional clubs and associations, and philanthropic communities, are rich in their potential to address a wide range of social problems. Informed by local knowledge, born of close-in ties, civil society can be much more effective than government at addressing social problems and less hampered by bureaucratic and inflexible rules. As government programs expand, they often crowd out the institutions of civil society. Why am I having trouble with that? As government programs expand, they often crowd out the institutions of civil society and their role in discovering solutions and providing assistance. The 9th one, spontaneous order. Spontaneous order is the idea that much of the order within society arises not by top-down control or design, but by bottom-up processes of trial, error, learning, and course correction. And now moving on to the final 3. Number 10, intellectual humility. While classical liberals emphasize the power of reason, they also recognize the limits of reason. Liberal agreements for free speech also recognize the importance of intellectual humility. Those who favor limiting the speech of others are implicitly making the claim that they know better and can infallibly determine which speech should be deemed worthwhile. Classical liberals see and challenge the arrogance inherent in such a position and are led instead to the default assumption that all of us are wrong about some things, and it is only by listening to other people and continually testing our prior views that we can learn the things we might be wrong about. 11, economic freedom. Classical liberals tend to favor public policy grounded in the principle of economic freedom over policies grounded in the principle of economic control. Public policy that inhibits entrepreneurial discovery and restricts people from engaging in mutually beneficial voluntary exchange impedes economic growth and the improvements in human well-being that growth brings. And to the last of the 12 core principles and ideas, peaceful solutions. Peaceful solutions are key to fostering a society in which people can go about their daily affairs in a context of voluntary cooperation and the absence of violence or war. Let me read that again. Peaceful solutions are key to fostering a society in which individuals can go about their daily affairs in a context of voluntary cooperation and the absence of violence and war. Classical liberals tend to favor non-interventionist policies. This does not mean, however, that classical liberals are isolationists. Instead, when it comes to international engagement, classical liberals favor the free movement of capital and labor, people, goods, services, and ideas across borders as the best known recipe for international cooperation and peace. Well, those 12 were quite a mouthful and quite a lot to digest. But I want to propose to you that an understanding of these 12 core principles and ideas that influence a liberal response or a liberal presentation goes a long ways towards active listening, and cooperation, dialogue, respect, and problem solving.